Hello and welcome to Side Ventures. My name is Gino, and each episode I'll be talking to someone about things they do outside of their day job that brings joy and sometimes a bit of income into their lives. In this episode, I'm joined by Adam Foster, founder of a PR and marketing firm by day, but on evenings and weekends, Adam takes on a completely different persona as he steps into the wrestling ring at venues across the UK. In our discussion, Adam talks about the multiple attempts he had to make to get started in wrestling, his anxiety before a match starts, what it's like to go from watching your heroes on the screen to wrestling in the same ring as them, how his family feels about his chosen pursuit, and what it takes to become a successful wrestler. Adam, welcome to the podcast. If you can just get us started with telling us a bit more about yourself and your day job, please.
Yeah, so my name's Adam Foster. I'm the founder of Proper Mint Marketing, content marketing and SEO agency. I'm based in the Northeast, Teesside, Hartlepool to be specific. And I'm a Northeast born, Northeast bred lad, which will probably come through as we're talking today.
Fantastic. And the reason we've got you on this podcast today is because outside of your day job, you have an absolutely fascinating hobby, or say hobby, that's probably the wrong term for it, side project, hustle, however you want to call it. You are a wrestler and a competitive bodybuilder.
That is right, yeah, both doing double bubble, pulling the double shift with wrestling and bodybuilding.
I mean, one of those alone sounds incredibly difficult to do, but let's start with the wrestling one. At what point did you think, you know what, I like wrestling, I want to do wrestling? When was the point when you thought, actually, I can do this? I'm going to take the first step to actually becoming a wrestler.
So this is a little bit of I don't know if it's a multi-part story, I suppose. So I've been a lifelong wrestling fan, WWE fan, since literally I was a little kid. I've got two older brothers. I've actually got four sisters and two brothers. But my two older brothers, there's quite a bit of an age gap between me and them. They were always into wrestling. Wrestling was always on in the house when I was a kid. So I don't remember ever growing up with wrestling not being on in the house. Or, I remember even when I was like a toddler, wrestling being on Sky Sports and all that kind of stuff. So I've always been around wrestling, if you like, or at least had wrestling on around me. When I was a kid, the dream job for me was I want to be a wrestler. Some people want to be a football player, an actor, an astronaut, a doctor, whatever it might be. For me, my dream was to be a wrestler. So I actually started training when I was 15. It was on a school night. It was on a Monday night. It took place in Middlesbrough. I lived in Hartlepool. My dad took me and a couple of my friends on the first session, brought us home. The second week, we got the bus there. We got the bus back. It was a Monday night. It was well before, we're talking like early, mid-2000s here. So I didn't have a mobile phone back then. They weren't as common, for kids to have. So I got home after midnight. And as soon as I walked in the door on a school night, my mum was like, right, that's it. You're not doing this wrestling anymore. And that was it. As a 15-year-old kid, when your mum and dad tell you you can't go wrestling and it's in a different town that you need to get a bus to or a lift to, and you don't get the money for a bus ticket or whatever, it's like, right, that's it, wrestling's done. So then I give it another go when I was 20, maybe 21. Again, it was in Middlesbrough. I was in Hartlepool. This time I was studying. I was a university student, independent, adult at this point, still lived at home though. We'd get the bus there, train, get the bus back. Never stuck with it. The wrestling training closed down, and that was kind of the end of it. And I thought, right, I'll give it a go twice. It's not meant to be. I then started and stuck with it properly in 2016. There was a local show in Hartlepool. There was flyers on the chairs, and on the flyers there was a Facebook page. Followed the Facebook page, saw they did training, and there was training about 35 minutes away from where I lived, like in a car. So I was like, right, I'm an adult now. Like I can drive. I can, give it a go. Started training the back end of 2016. It was like end of September, October time. I remember it was coming up to Halloween. So yeah, end of September, October time. And then here we are, 6, 7, 8 years on, whatever it is, and stuck with it.
Can you describe your wrestling style? Like any signature moves? Like how would you look on stage compared to other wrestlers?
So a wrestling style is very much like a powerhouse brawler, is how that would be described as. So in British wrestling, I'm not the tallest guy, I'm like 5'10", but I am like from a physique kind of perspective, like I am probably the how would I word it? The most jacked up guy or the most muscular guy on the scene. So my wrestling style portrays, like, has to follow how I look. So it is a very much a power kind of brawling style. So some of the signature moves I've got would be like a spear, jackhammer, Samoan drop, power slam, the running power slam, flying shoulder tackle. I very rarely, if ever, go at the top rope. I don't feel comfortable up there. It's not my style of wrestling. I can do basic wrestling, hold for hold, headlocks, wrist locks, things like that. We mentioned that earlier. But my kind of bread and butter would be, you know, those big power moves, those big strikes, big chops, big clotheslines, big shoulder tackles, and then the crowd work and the showmanship.
And so, you know, I think of wrestling, and I think we're a similar age. I remember WWF as it was back then. I'm thinking
Yeah.
big characters, American production, you know, Hulk Hogan, Macho Man Randy Savage. Like, do you have a wrestling persona? Do you go into the ring as yourself, or
Yeah.
is there a character? Like, tell me more
Yeah,
about.
yeah. So for me, like, when you say persona, character, that's exactly what wrestling is. Without a character, without a persona, anybody can put a pair of trunks on, a pair of boots on, learn how to do a headlock, learn how to do a headlock takeover, a hip toss, a wrist lock, an armbar, and yeah, well done. You're a wrestler. For me, professional wrestling, WWE, or as WWE likes to call it, sport entertainment, it's all about those larger than life characters. As you mentioned there, going back to the 80s and the early 90s, your Hulk Hogan's, Ultimate Warriors, Macho Man Randy Savage, The Undertaker. My era was kind of like the towards the back end of the 90s. So my favourite wrestler absolutely of all time is The Rock. But you had The Rock, Stone Cold, Triple H, The Undertaker, Kane, Mick Foley. These were all larger than life. Whether you want to call them a character, a persona, a gimmick, the terminology changes, but ultimately they all had something about them that allowed them to connect with the crowd. They had this persona, this character, or whatever it is that you want to call them. So for me, that's Shreddy. So my wrestling name is Shreddy. When I'm out in front of the crowd, it's Shreddy. And Shreddy is literally me turned up to, like, you know, 10 up to 11. That's a very common analogy, or a very common phrase that, like, Stone Cold Steve Austin talks about. A good wrestler, a good wrestling persona or personality is you exaggerated, and that's exactly what the Shreddy character is.
Now, Shreddy, I'm assuming, alludes to being shredded, right? Because obviously you have another side venture here, which is your competitive bodybuilding. So, you know, I've seen the pictures and videos of you in the ring. It's quite clear you're very shredded. You've worked on that. You've become very muscular. Like, who creates that character and that persona? Is it all you? Do you have trainers
Yes,
that
I
work
mean,
with you on
so
it?
it was me who created it originally, but then over the years, I've had lots of input from different wrestlers, a lot more experience than me. You know, you take little bits and pieces and ideas from people to kind of craft it, but the original Shreddy character persona was something that I made, and it actually started off as a YouTube channel. So going back to 2012, 2013, this was before I started competitive bodybuilding, but I was still very much into the gym at this point. So I'll have been 21, 22 years old at this point when I set the YouTube channel up. I'd been training pretty seriously in the gym since I was a teenager. And the reason I started training in the gym was because of wrestling. I grew up, as I just mentioned, watching these larger than life characters, these larger than life wrestlers. And I think that conditioned me, you know, being a kid, to thinking, okay, this is what I want to look like, because a lot of the guys back then had these amazing physiques, not necessarily bodybuilding physiques, but they were, you know, they were big, or they were jacked up, or they were ripped, or whatever it might have been. They just had these unique looks and these unique physiques, like athletic physiques, or however you want to define it. So that's what got me into the gym originally. And the way that the Shreddy kind of name and persona came about is because I had a friend from university who we actually worked the same job together. And this was like when I'd started working in marketing and digital marketing. So he would ask me for advice because I was a lot bigger, a lot stronger than what he was. I hadn't started competing yet though. So he'd ask me for advice. He would ignore the answers I would give him. Then he would tell me 3 or 4 or 5 months down the line, he'd watch the YouTuber, and then he would regurgitate the advice I gave him 3, 4, 5 months ago. But it was from a YouTube, and it got to the point where one day he said something to me, and I was like, I told you this 3 months ago. Why are you now only starting to listen? Like, what have you listened for you know, to make you realise what I'm saying is right? And he'd been watching some YouTube, like, fitness channels, and this was before I'd got into the YouTube fitness community. I used YouTube back then just to watch wrestling, to watch games videos. I didn't watch any kind of fitness stuff on YouTube outside of some pro bodybuilder stuff. So I thought, right, if the only way to get you to listen to advice is from a YouTuber, I'm going to create my YouTube so you'll start listening to me. And it was done in like a bit of a tongue-in-cheek kind of way. But on the desk at the time, I was like bulking, and one of the staples of my diet was porridge oats or ready break. So I saw this ready break box on my desk. So I was like, right, I'm going to call my YouTube channel. I just looked at it, I was like, Shreddy Brex, I'm going to get you shredded. And it was just rhymed. So I was like, right, that's it. Ready Break was one of my favourite foods, or one of the foods I used to eat the most at the time. So I was like, you're Ready Break, shredded, Shreddy Break. It was just like literally off, like there was no more thought given to it than that. And I was like, right, that's the name. So I made the channel up and started posting some videos. Some of those very early videos will still be there from, like I say, 10 years ago, 11 years ago. So that's how the character came about. But when I started doing YouTube, I approached it almost as, because I wasn't Adam, I was Shreddy Breck. I was Adam from Shreddy Breck. And I approached it, because I was a massive wrestling fan, as if it was almost like a wrestler cutting promos and a wrestler in this this wrestling persona giving this fitness advice and making these YouTube videos. So that's kind of how the name came about. That's how the initial character came about.
Much like AC/DC famously got their name, I think, off the front of a Hoover that had
Oh, okay.
AC/DC on it. You got your name from the front of a cereal box. That's fantastic.
Exactly, yeah.
For people who are familiar with, again, the wrestling that they've seen on TV, big American style stadiums, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
What does a wrestling match look like in the UK for you? If you were to go to a match, what are the audience going to see? What kind of venue are we in? But also, what's your perspective? You're backstage ready to go on. What do you do to prepare for a match? What does it feel like when you step into the ring? Give us the story of a night of wrestling for you.
Yes, I mean, I actually document this on my YouTube channel whenever I've got wrestling shows. I don't do it every single show, but I vlog quite a lot of show days. So, and this is to give that kind of behind the scenes look of, okay, I'm waking up on a show day. What does the day look like for not just a British professional wrestler, but what does it look like for someone who's also a bodybuilder doing the wrestling? So I kind of go through my diet, I'll go through what the process is for a day. So wrestling, kind of a night of wrestling, before you get to that night, you need to think, okay, where's the venue? Because typically you are travelling all over the country for a wrestling show. Now I'm based in the Northeast, so quite a lot of the shows I do are Northeast based, but I'll also wrestle in Liverpool, Manchester, London, and you typically travel there and back in one day. So it can be a long day, or you can have hours and hours and hours of travel, upwards of 3 hours there, upwards of 3 hours back, for maybe 25 minutes in front of the crowd, including entrances, including celebrations. The match itself you might be lucky to get a 15-minute bell-to-bell match, and you've travelled maybe 6+ hours, you've hung around at the show all day. But what does the night look like? So assuming like you're there at the show, if you've watched wrestling on TV before and you go to a live wrestling show, you kind of know what you're going to be getting from more shows. But typically, the content of the show, if you've ever watched wrestling on TV, you know kind of what you're getting, you know what to expect. In terms of the venues can range from sports halls and leisure centres to working men's social clubs. It really is a mix of, depending on who the promoter is, what the venue is. Some venues are better than others, some backstage areas are better than others. So in terms of the venues, it is very much, it can vary in terms of the quality. The shows themselves can vary in terms of quality in terms of management and production, quality in terms of the performers on the show as well. When you first start out wrestling, typically you would be put with more experienced wrestlers because they help guide you through the match. A wrestling match is a singles wrestling match, which is the most common wrestling match. It's two performers, two wrestlers, creating the illusion of competitive combat sports for one person to win. The reality of wrestling is you have two performers working together to put on an exhibition to make it look like they are having a competitive fight, a competitive bout, a competitive match. If you have two inexperienced wrestlers, the match typically won't be very good. You would typically put an experienced wrestler on with an inexperienced wrestler because the experienced wrestler can help guide that inexperienced wrestler through. Some shows you'll go to, it's full of trainees and the experience levels are low across the board. So I might be going there to wrestle one of their trainees, and my job is to help guide them through the match or to put a good show on. I might be going to a show and wrestling a former WWE superstar where they are a lot more experienced and a lot better than me. They're going to kind of bring me up and help kind of guide me. But on that same show, you might have two trainees from the same training school. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. So the quality of the shows does differ. In terms of what it looks like on show day, you arrive at the venue. Typically, you'll meet your opponent, you'll chat about the match, you'll have an idea from the promoter of how long you've got to perform, whether that's curtain to curtain or bell to bell. The promoter will say, we want this person to win, we want this person to lose. Sometimes they'll give you a specific finish. Again, some promotions will say, they'll be a bit more detailed about, okay, we want X, Y, and Z from this match. Other times it's just you versus you. Go and figure it out. And it just, again, depends on what the show is. You kind of plan your match with whoever that you're working that night, plan your match. Then it's a case of warming up, stretching, making sure that you're ready, going over the match, trying to remember the key points. And that's kind of like the show. And you don't get a chance to rehearse the match. A lot of people think you spend a week or a weekend rehearsing a match. No, you go to a show. Sometimes you might be wrestling someone you've wrestled loads of times. Sometimes you might be wrestling someone who you train with. That's typically easier because you kind of have chemistry. You've worked each other plenty of times. You know each other's stuff. So you can call more stuff on the fly there. Sometimes you show up, you've never heard of someone, you've never met them, first time you're ever seeing them, and you kind of plan the match from there.
Fantastic. And so you've met up with the people beforehand. You've planned who's going to win the fight, perhaps. You've maybe trained with them before, maybe haven't. To put this into your eyes now, what are you seeing? You come out of the waiting area of whatever it is. You walk through the audience. You fully embodied Shreddy.
Yeah.
You step into the ring. What happens next?
So at that point, I will be immersed in that character of that Shreddy persona even before I step out of the curtain. As soon as that music hits or as soon as the bell rings on the match before you and you know you're up next, it's like, right now it's time to... You might have been messing about, having a laugh, having to carry on all night. You hear that bell, and then for me at least, this is where wrestling's a very... I'm not saying that I suffer from anxiety, because I think every single person gets anxious about things. I know for a fact not every person suffers from clinical anxiety. There's a difference between them. But I do feel a sense of anxiety, or I do feel anxious just before you go out. Some people say, oh, do you get nervous? Do you get this? Do you get that? The best way I can describe it is just an anxious feeling. Then as soon as, at that moment, I'm starting to feel like I'm Shreddy. You step out, you make your entrance, and then it's almost like that feeling of anxiety goes away. And it's like when you're out in front of the crowd, you're almost like you're another person, and this character is kind of you're this character now. There's no Adam and then Shreddy. It's just I am Shreddy when I'm out there. So yeah, you make your entrance. You're in the ring. Your opponent might already be there. They might be coming out after you. And then the bell rings, and then you just start. And then that depends on, how you plan the match. Sometimes the match might be planned out move for move. Sometimes it might be, we'll go out, we'll wrestle for a bit, we'll end up in this position, or we'll end up in this spot. So it's just kind of a sense of whatever the plan for the match is. But what you would do before you start doing anything, you've made your entrance and you're kind of gauging the crowd. Are they coming up and being lively for basic things? In that case, you can kind of milk more crowd work and do less physicality, and then you build to the physicality, so it means more. Is it more of maybe I don't want to use the term adult or adult audience, because even adults can enjoy the showmanship of it, but there's certain audiences that don't really care for the showman stuff, and they just want to see the tie up, the headlocks, the spots, the moves kind of thing. So you can get a good sense of that just from your entrance, like how lively are the crowd, how easy are they to work, and then that might actually change what you've planned coming out, and good professional wrestlers can kind of change things on the go. Inexperienced wrestlers wouldn't be able to do that, just because it's a difficult thing to do. Wrestling's probably the most difficult thing I've done in my life. So you gauge in the crowd, and then you just kind of try and go to plan as to whatever you've planned with your opponent, and you start performing.
And so, for you, what do you enjoy most? You were thinking back to your inspiration from the WWE, WWF era and the performance of it and the showmanship of it, but also the athleticness of it and the physicality of it. Now you're doing it. Now you've done it for a number of years. Do you prefer the showman bit and getting the crowd up and riled and really performing to the crowd? Do you prefer the moves, wrestling around in the ring?
No,
And
definitely for me, it's definitely the showmanship side of
okay,
things. And I always kind of say to people, I grew up a WWE fan. I didn't grow up a wrestling fan. It gets dubbed sports entertainment by Vince McMahon, the founder of WWE. He doesn't call it wrestling; he calls it sports entertainment. You, as part of a wrestling show, you obviously want good wrestling performances, but wrestling's very subjective, and what one person thinks is good wrestling could be different to what somebody else thinks is good wrestling. But ultimately, it's kind of agreed on that good wrestling is when the crowd are making noise and the crowd's loud. So for me, I'm much more in the thing I like most about wrestling is that showman, that entertainment part and aspect of wrestling. Because, like I say, you can go in, apply a headlock, transition to a wrist lock, into an armbar, do a takedown. And if there's no charisma there from the performers, if there's no wrestling stories, anyone can go in and wrestle about, anyone can go in and do moves. But for people to care about what you're doing, you need to have a character, you need to have a persona that people can kind of latch onto or people can kind of get interested in, and you need to tell a story in your match. And the storytelling can range from anything from you're a big guy, you're a small guy, but what you do in the match, how do you portray that? Outside of just looking at you, how do you portray that? You could have two wrestlers who match up very closely in terms of how they look, physique-wise, height-wise, weight-wise. One might be a brawler, one might be a submission specialist. How do you tell that story? Then you can get a little bit more complex on the storytelling if it's a promotion where they draw the same fans or they draw a regular crowd of fans that have storylines going. The story could be, okay, this wrestler here is on his ascent, he's on his rise, he's trying to, work his way because he wants to wrestle for the main title in that promotion. You might have another wrestler who is on a bit of a losing streak, or they've been in the main event, but for whatever reason, they've lost the title, they've lost the confidence. So then you've got this dynamic of, okay, you've got an ascending wrestler and a wrestler kind of like who's lost a bit of steam. How does that factor into how they're performing? How do the wrestlers kind of portray that through their actions in the ring? Is the wrestler who's lost the confidence, is he making mistakes in basic moves? Is he not as confident? Or is he able to kind of overcome that and still do what he does to take on this new guy or this guy that's on the ascent? There's loads of different ways to tell stories, and that's what really gets fans invested. And that's obviously the showmanship side of it.
wonderful. And at the end of the day, the bell rings, the audience goes home. What does success look like for you at the end of a match?
For me, it's twofold. One, it's if I've planned the match with someone and we've got a specific plan of what that should be, on one level, success is my movement was right. I was in position for everything. I didn't forget anything. I didn't make any mistakes. My opponent didn't make any mistakes. The match went smooth. The match went to plan. That's a level of success. However, ultimately, a match being successful would be when you go throughout the match, the crowd is making noise. They're coming up when you want them to. They're quiet when you want them to. When you're making your comeback, when the babyface, the good guy, is making the comeback, the crowd is going mental. When you're in that home stretch and you're hitting each other with moves for those near falls, the crowd thinks this is the end. Oh, and then he's kicked out. Then there's something else happens. Oh, and then he kicks out again. And the crowd are coming up. The crowd are lively for that until eventually you get that actual finish, whether it's a pinfall, a submission, whatever it might be, and the crowd pop, the crowd go crazy, and they're making that noise. If you have a match where the crowd aren't really reacting, to the spots in the match. They're not reacting to the moments in the match that you think they will. And then it comes to the finish, and they're quiet for the finish. They don't really react to the finish. Even if the match went technically perfect, as in you were in the right position, all your movement looked good, you hit your moves good, no one forgot anything. If the crowd don't make that noise or elicit that response, whether they're cheering or booing, typically if a bad guy wins, they're going to boo. If a good guy wins, they're going to cheer. If the crowd aren't making that noise, that's the sign of a bad match. Even if technically everything went to plan. If the crowd aren't invested, I come away thinking, that was crap. If the crowd make that noise and everything from a movement position and from like a technical position was smooth and I made no mistakes, then you're on cloud nine.
And we haven't really talked much about your competitive bodybuilding, right? But when I think of competitive bodybuilding, as someone from the outside, and I'm very ignorant on the topic, it seems to me a very solo venture that you do. You may have a trainer with you, right? But you're working on yourself, literally. You're developing your own body. You're competing on your own. It's very much about yourself and what you can do for yourself, to yourself, right? But when you talk about success as a wrestler, as a sports entertainer, it's telling to me that success to you is that the people who are watching you and being there for the show have a good time. It's all about them and not about you. It's not about you winning.
100%.
Where do you think that comes from? That for you, the thing that you've chosen to do, that you want to do since you were 15, actually the success for you is everyone else having a good time.
With wrestling, I look back at when I was a kid, what did I like as a kid? And what for me made wrestling good. And it was just being, whether the good guy wins or the good guy loses, that wasn't what made me think, oh, that was crap because my favourite didn't win. It was being engaged in losing. What's the term I'm looking for? It's kind of just suspending your disbelief or being involved and drawn into that form of entertainment for the hour or the 2 hours you're there. So now me as a wrestler, the performance or the success isn't about if I win or lose a match, because that's irrelevant. Wrestling's not about winning and losing. That's MMA, that's boxing, that's legitimate combat sports. Wrestling is not a sport, it's sports entertainment. It's a form of entertainment with athleticism in there, with drama in there, with storytelling in there. And the way that you gauge that is by the fan response and the profit, ultimately.
So, thinking back to the inspiration of when you started doing this, right? You had, was it 6 siblings? You said 2 older brothers and some sisters, and you were a teenager watching this. It seemed to be all around you, and you were looking at these wrestlers. What would teenage Adam Foster now think about Shreddy if you were watching yourself back now?
Absolutely mental. And I've actually, on podcasts and on Facebook, social media posts and things like that, I've actually mentioned this a couple of times this year because there's a wrestler, very famous wrestler who wrestled in the 90s and the early 2000s called Scotty Tuati. Anybody my age who was into wrestling will know Scotty Tuati. Anybody my age who wasn't a wrestling fan will probably know Scotty Tuati because of how popular wrestling was back then. In July this year, I got to wrestle Scotty Tuati in Newcastle for a promotion that I kind of consider my home promotion. And Scotty Tuati is a wrestler that me, when I was 8-9 years old, would be watching on a Friday night, on a Saturday morning on the TV, on WWF program at the time. One of my sisters, 2 years younger than me, she would also watch on a Saturday morning with me. We would watch Scotty Tuati, and he had a move called the Worm. He would hop around on one leg and then do like the dance move, the Worm, and then chop somebody. We would do that on each other in the living room on a Saturday morning as we're watching wrestling. Fast forward from 8-9-year-old Adam to a 32-year-old Shreddy at the time, being in the ring as his music was playing and he was making his entrance. The referee in the ring is one of my best mates. I just turned to him, grabbed him by the shoulders and said, I'm wrestling fucking Scotty Tuati. And it was just bizarre. He was one of my favourites as a kid. And the way I looked at wrestlers when I was a kid, they were the biggest stars on the planet. To me, they were bigger than Hollywood actors, they were bigger than footballers, they were bigger than pop stars, because I was so invested in wrestling. To fast forward, from 9-year-old to 32-year-old, to be wrestling someone that I watched and that I loved and I was a massive fan of when I was a kid is bizarre, absolutely bizarre. Another similar thing that's happened this year as well. I've been fortunate enough. I was invited to Qatar to wrestle, and on the wrestling show in Qatar, there was another wrestler who I watched when I was a kid called D'Lo Brown. I got to spend a week with D'Lo Brown, training with D'Lo Brown. He actually ring announced me, and he was managing me in this match. And that was just a moment where I got to cut a promo at the end. We got to, share some time in the ring with each other. And that again, so twice in the same year, I've got to wrestle or perform with wrestlers I grew up idolizing. It's literally living the dream. The only way that I say it's living the dream for me is to be signed by WWE and wrestle on WWE programming. The next closest thing is to be wrestling these WWF, ex-WWF superstars, wrestlers that I watched when I was a kid. That's like the next closest thing for me.
And so you just mentioned now what comes next, right? Or the dream, at least.
Yeah.
What can you do to make that happen? Like, what are the next steps for
If I had the answer, I'd have done it by now. It's one of those things in wrestling, there's a lot of wrestling terminology. So if you were to call something like a shoot job, it's what's your real job, or a shoot career, what's your real kind of thing. Everybody in wrestling, most people in wrestling, are chasing that wrestling dream. Very few people are just even if they say that, a lot of people will be like, I don't want to go to WWE or whatever. There's very few people who are genuinely wrestling as a hobby, because to just go and wrestle in a social club on a Saturday, it's too time consuming, it's too much of a toll for there to be no bigger kind of payoff or no bigger goal. So for me, WWE is the goal, and that's been the goal ever since I started training. The goal for me wasn't just I want to have a bit of fun wrestling on a weekend. For me, it was I want to get to WWE, and this is where I start. Now, in my shoot job, or in anybody's shoot line of work, there's usually a typical career progression path. It might be whether you're starting at school or college or university, you go and get your qualifications, then you get an entry-level job or an apprenticeship or whatever it might be. There's a very clear path of progression of more time spent doing something. You can then potentially do these qualifications. You use this experience to either apply for a promotion, or you kind of jump around jobs to move up that career path and get more money, get better job titles and things like that. So there's a pretty clear progression system. With wrestling, I kind of equate it to, you hear these stories about somebody singing for years in a pub, and then they got the lucky break, or an actor who was doing working all these extra jobs and pursuing acting, then they get the lucky break. It's the same with wrestling. I could do what I've been doing for the past 7 years, not change anything, but then all of a sudden I'm in the right place at the right time. Someone sees me, bam, there's your break. Earlier this year, I've had 2 Japanese companies message me out of the blue, want me to go wrestle for them next year. Not got anything finalised with them yet, but we're in the process of trying to kind of get that sorted. I haven't done anything different to get that opportunity. It's just somehow someone somewhere has seen me. It could be as simple as you're at a show backstage because one of your friends is performing there. Someone's been injured, dropped out, or we need someone to wrestle on the show. You wrestle, then somebody watching that show in the crowd or online is a promoter for a bigger promotion, and then that gets you an opportunity there. It could be someone from one of the big companies is randomly at the show. That's happened to me before when I've been at shows. You just got these promoters randomly at these smaller shows. They see you, they like you, they're going to book you. Mm-hmm. It's just, honestly, you kind of just grinding away and working and blind hope that something comes off. There's obviously certain things you can do to improve your chances, such as networking, emailing people, going to some of the biggest shows to help out, to meet people, like I say, that networking aspect of things, doing outreach to make people that you want to work with aware of you. So I have emailed WWE and I've got responses from them, but that's not a tryout. That's not a job offer. That's not a job guarantee. So there is things you can do to obviously improve your chances. And a large part of wrestling is networking, and it's who you know, and it's to get those opportunities. Just like I suppose a lot of lines of work are, but it is genuinely one of those things where it's just you grind and you grind and you grind, and almost in blind hope, hoping that something does come off one day.
It reminds me of an expression I've heard before about different performing arts and different sort of creative works. Is that it takes years and years to become an overnight success.
Oh,
You know,
100, yeah, I hear that all the time. Like with wrestling, like you'll see some of the stars in WWE who, on the outside or from a fan's perspective, who doesn't follow independent wrestling, they'll think, oh, this guy's amazing. He just came out the scene and overnight he's a massive success. There's a guy in WWE now called LA Knight. I think he's in his early 40s, been wrestling since he was like a teenager. Went to WWE maybe 2 years ago or something like that, 3 years ago. Only really this year he started gaining momentum, and now he's one of the main stars. People are saying, or people who think he's an overnight success, don't know what he's done for the past 20 years to be in that position. And it's somewhat similar with the bodybuilding. Like you're on stage, or a wrestling fan will see me in the physique, and they think, oh, well, he's always been like that. But they don't see the 15 years of dieting and training I've put in, and the time in the gym, and the lifestyle I've led to build this physique. They just see me, and the first time they see me is, oh, Shreddy looks, he's big, he's jacked, he's shredded, he's always looked like that. They don't see that progression, they just see the end result.
So the people that have seen that progression, like your family, for example, that you watched wrestling with, your parents, what do they think? What do they talk to you about in terms of your wrestling? How do they see it? I imagine when you were a kid, your parents are probably telling you, stop throwing yourselves around and stop trying to
It's
don't
a
watch too
little
much
bit of a
violence
weird
TV, that sort of
one.
thing.
It's not so much of a sore spot to talk about, but it is a little bit of a weird one when it comes to family. I'm very close with my family, but for whatever reason, when it comes to wrestling, 100%, when I was a kid and I said I want to be a wrestler, I had older sisters that said to me, oh, stop being stupid, you can't be a wrestler. I would ask for wrestling toys for birthday or Christmas. No, I'm not buying your wrestling toys. So my family, like my mum and dad in particular, they've only seen me ever wrestle once, and they'll ask me about it, but like I think, well, if you were that bothered, you would come and watch me perform more, kind of thing. So in terms of family, it's almost like I almost get the feeling that they don't really, not that they don't care or not that they're not bothered, but it's almost they don't understand it, because my younger sister, like I mentioned, she's seen on Facebook, like when I was wrestling Scotty Twatty, she knows what a big deal that is. So it's like certain things might happen, and from an outsider's perspective, when I got to go to Qatar, they were all like, oh, that would be really good. And it's like, yeah, it is good, but like, I've done loads of other good things in wrestling that you've not, give two shits about. So from a family perspective, it's almost like, I don't want to say that they don't care, but it's almost like there's not much of an interest or an understanding there.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas my girlfriend and my mates from school who I grew up with watching wrestling, they like absolutely buzz off it. They're like, because they know how much of a wrestling fan I was when I was a kid. They were wrestling fans. A lot of them grew out of it, but like my mates will come and watch me wrestle. Or my mates, like I had a show this past Saturday up in Newcastle, I live in Hartlepool. It's about a 40-minute drive. One of my best mates from school brought his wife and 2 kids to watch me wrestle. And when we were kids, we would be watching wrestling together. We would play the wrestling games together. And then, like, he's now bringing his son and daughter to watch me wrestle. And he's been to watch me wrestle, like, quite a few times. So, in terms of, like, let's call it a social circle rather than just family, there's certain people in that social circle, like friends, close friends, and things like that, who absolutely do buzz off it. And, like, they'll see what I'm doing and they're made up for me. But for me, it's a weird one, almost bittersweet again, because my goal is WWE. So everything that I do that's an achievement, if you like, in wrestling, I don't see it that way because it's not WWE. And for me, I say this to people all the time, like if, let's say in 5 years' time, or let's say I've wrestled for 10 years or whatever it is, and I quit, and I've never at least had a trial for WWE, I've wrestled Scotty Twatty, I've been to Qatar, I'm going to France next month, I've wrestled, in different countries. I would genuinely look back on my entire time of wrestling as being a failure and almost a waste of time because I never got that WWE opportunity. So, because I know what I want, anything under that isn't success to me, if that makes sense. But to other people, they would look at it and they would think, oh, well, you've done this, you've done this, you've done this. To me, it's just like, yeah, but it's not WWE.
That's really interesting. So, as much as you're enjoying it and doing it and having, performances where you put on a great show and the crowd are really going for it, really for you, success is the tryout for WWE. Even if they say don't choose you, that tryout is what you're looking to get.
To try, because then at least if I don't, the dream would be to get signed, to go to America and to be, a WWE superstar. That's like the absolute dream. I could be content though if I had a tryout and they give me feedback to say the reason we're not going to hire you is because of X, Y, and Z. Now, unless I was in that position, the most likely scenario would be if I had a tryout and I didn't get signed, because it's very rare that people get signed on the first tryouts. They would typically give you feedback about, oh, go away and work on X, Y, and Z. I would do that. But for whatever reason, if I had a tryout and I thought, right, for whatever reason now, I don't want to pursue wrestling, the business is, going to take up too much of my time. And because the thing with wrestling, if you're a top star, like someone on The Rock's level, Stone Cold's level, modern day John Cena, Roman Reigns, you're making millions of dollars a year. But that's like a very, very small percentage of wrestlers. You're going to have a lot of wrestlers on TV where what I do with my business, I can actually make more money doing what I'm doing now than being a WWE superstar. It's not like they're all multi-millionaires outside of those very select few. So for me, again, wrestling's not necessarily about the money because I have an established career. I have a business that I enjoy. For me, wrestling, it's like, this is what I want to do. This is what I've wanted to do from being a little kid. And yeah, the money to get paid to do that would be nice. But to kind of go back to what you said, like, for me, WWE would be the dream. The tryout, if I'd never at least had a tryout with them, I would genuinely write off my entire experience of wrestling as just being a waste of time. If I have a tryout and then for whatever reason, I'd give up, I'd stop, I wouldn't look at that as a failure. I would look at that as, okay, I dedicated X number of years to wrestling. I give it a go. WWE knew I existed. I had that opportunity. It didn't work out, but I was still kind of on the radar, and I was able to at least make an impression or have my foot in the door, or however I would phrase it. I would be content with that. If I don't at least get a tryout, I would literally just write off the entire experiences I wasted X number of years in my life.
Oh, that's incredible. And it really shows how much drive you have.
No, I appreciate that.
At least in the WWE, right? That's the goal, and that's a big goal, but it's
it is, yeah, massive.
Amazing.
Hopefully it pays off one day, but like I say, I'm just working blindly and hope.
You previously mentioned about some of your family members who don't perhaps appreciate or understand what you're doing in the wrestling. If you could have them to come and watch a match that you're doing, would you prefer it to be a match where you win as the wrestler in the ring, or a match where you perhaps lose, but it's a really good show for the audience, everyone's involved and up and roaring?
I would say definitely the second again. Like, I think sometimes, like, one of the questions that friends and family do sometimes ask is when they know, like, oh, have you been wrestling lately? I'm like, yeah, I was wrestling at the weekend. Did you want to lose? That's the first thing they'll ask. So I think from an outsider's perspective, those wins and losses do count. But if they came to a show that I lost, but it was a quality match, quality crowd, quality production values, they would see, like, I might lose I might be the good guy, I might get cheated out of the win. I might be the bad guy, and I've been, cheating all the way through the match. I've been, making things really hard for the babyface, the good guy. But then that last home stretch, it's like I slip on a banana peel and I get the egg on my face, and it's like they'll get the story, and that's what would make them think that was good. Do you know what I mean? Like, I would much rather them see the quality match at a quality show at the quality crowd than coming to like a crap show where I win.
Fantastic. If anybody else wanted to have a go at doing this and wanted to get into wrestling, where would they go? Like, what kind of resources should they be looking at? What would you recommend they take a look at?
So it would probably depend on where they're based in, like, assuming that they're listening from like in England or in the UK. There's with social media now, you can very easily find the training schools, and there's quality training schools all around the country. So if you're based in the northeast, there's a couple of schools up here. If you're based kind of more Midlands, there's schools London. The best advice I could give would be to probably go on Twitter or Instagram, follow, some of the wrestling pages. Find a list of wrestling schools that was within your travel remit. The most important thing I would do though is to have a look on and to research who are the most reputable trainers, because there's a lot of trainers that haven't done anything. They're not very good wrestlers themselves, and they're running these training schools providing a poor quality service, and you have people going to them just because out of convenience it's the closest one to me. My advice would be, if you can, travel a little bit further, spend a little bit more on travel or spend a little bit more on fuel to find a reputable school. And there is plenty of reputable schools all over the country. Off the top of my head, in the northeast, you've got Rampage Training, you've got PPW based down in Sheffield, you've got the Rev Pro Training School based down the London way, you've got the All Star School based down the London way, you've got Future Shock in Manchester, you've got Claw in Liverpool. Those are just the ones that I'm mentioning because it's people that I know. There'll be other schools out there in locations that are really good that I'm just not aware of myself because I'm not based in that location. So there will be. And a good way to find some of those is by going to some of your local shows, seeing which wrestlers are on there, and then asking the people running the show or asking some of the wrestlers, do you know of any schools in this area? Or just going online and finding some in the local area.
And as a final question, is there anything that I haven't asked that you wished I had asked you?
So there's one question that I wish I had asked, and it ties in to the Shreddy persona. So along with being known as Shreddy, I'm also the jacked, stacked daddy Shreddy. In every single show that I wrestle on, I always ask the question, who's the daddy? And if you ask me who's the daddy, the answer to that question would be me, Shreddy, the JSD, the jacked, stacked daddy of professional wrestling.
Well, listen, we are coming to our end of the time, and I want to make sure that anybody that's listened to this that wants to follow more about your adventure and your journey to WWE can find out more about it. So where can people see more about what you're doing? Maybe go see you wrestle. Where can they follow you online? I'll put it all in the show notes.
So I'm most active on Instagram. It's Shreddy Breck Gym. So that's SHREDDY Gym, so just how we would spell normal gym. I also have a YouTube channel, Shreddy Breck, on YouTube, where I do upload those vlogs of bodybuilding and the wrestling shows. I've got a Facebook page, Shreddy Breck, and I've also got a Twitter account, Shreddy Breck Gym. So between any of them, whichever platform you're on, you'll get some activity from me. But typically, I'd probably say Instagram, Twitter are the two places to follow me most on. Instagram a little bit more, and the YouTube for the video content.
Brilliant. Adam, I could have talked to you about this all day long. I've still got more questions, but maybe we'll have to bring you on for a second episode at some point.
Part two.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Gino. Really appreciate this.
Cheers. Thank you for listening. If you'd like to hear more episodes of Side Ventures, make sure to subscribe wherever you're listening to this podcast. Links and information from this discussion are in the show notes, and if you think you know someone who might like the show, please enjoy sharing this episode with them. If you have any feedback, or you have a side venture you'd like to discuss on the show with me, please send an email to gino@sideventures.co.uk. Finally, if you'd like to support the show, please rate and review Side Ventures on Apple Podcasts, as it helps other people to find us. Thank you.